Okay, let's go into the details a little bit more on F slope. This is a force that we include in our kinetic analysis of cycling. And it's related, how much that F slope is. It's related directly to how steep the hill is that we're climbing, as well as the gravitational force on the system. So here I just have a hill drawn, a schematic, and this would be some angle theta here. And I can draw the force vector here. I'm going to draw it big so I can make this work. This is F sub g, the force due to gravity acting on this box. And I want to break this into two components, one that is parallel to the surface of this ramp and one that's perpendicular. The way to do that is you draw a box around, a rectangle around this force vector with two corners of the box, the rectangle, at different ends of this force vector. So one corner here and one corner here. So I'm going to draw it like this. Dotted line first. And I'm going to draw it so that this rectangle, it has 90 degrees at each corner. And you see that this edge right here is parallel to the surface. This edge of the rectangle is perpendicular at 90 degrees to the surface. As long as you draw your rectangle with the two corners, kitty corner, with the force vector hitting each of those corners, you've drawn it correctly. Once I've drawn that rectangle, I end up selecting just this one side right here for my one force component and the other side for the other force component. This one right here is F perpendicular, and this one right here is F parallel. Remember, F parallel is F slope. Why? Because that force vector is going to influence the movement of this object, either moving upwards or downwards on this hill. If movement is uphill, then F slope is negative. Why? Because I'm trying to push this box uphill, and this force component, which is a constant based upon gravity, is opposing the direction of movement. If the movement is downhill, if I'm biking downhill or I'm running downhill even, F slope is positive. So if I'm trying to move in this direction, now that parallel force component is in the same direction of movement. So now that's helping me move downhill. Okay, so this is important. Most of the time when I'm talking about forces acting on the biker, I concern myself more with the uphill portion than the downhill portion. But the downhill portion is important to understand if we're trying to understand cycling performance overall. But typically, because the person needs to generate force to overcome any resistance forces, this becomes the critical one to at least talk about initially. All right, so now let's look at factors that influence this force magnitude. The first factor is how steep this hill is. So I'm going to draw another hill. Here's another piece of paper. I'm going to make it steeper than the first one. I'm going to try to draw about the same box. I'm going to try to draw about the same FG. So this is a steeper hill. I do the same exercise. I draw a rectangle around this force vector with the rectangle corners at the tail and the tip of the force vector. And the edges of this rectangle are either parallel, like this one, or perpendicular to this surface, this ramp surface. Not this one down here, this ramp surface. This edge and this edge, those are parallel to the ramp surface. This edge and this edge are perpendicular. So now I'll draw up my perpendicular component and my parallel component. This is F slope. Now, if I look back on my notes on my previous picture, well, if I did a decent enough job, I did pretty good. This slope force magnitude is greater than this slope force magnitude. Same force vector here, same weight of the object, but different force vectors for slope, for the parallel component, okay, which is the slope vector. Why is this one bigger than that one? Because it's a steeper hill. And in fact, if I do this again, and I make an even steeper hill, all right, I draw about the same box and the same, roughly, force vector here for FG. The box still weighs the same amount. Do the same exercise. Draw a rectangle around this box, or this force vector, my perpendicular component, my parallel component. That's F slope, AKA F parallel, or whichever way you want to do it. This magnitude is even greater than that magnitude. The resistance to bike up a steeper hill is greater simply because of the slope force. The resistance to bike up a hill is greater because the steepness of the slope, and this parallel component of this force vector continues to get bigger. Gets smaller and gets smaller, less steep of hill. It's not as hard to bike up a smaller hill. Or think of it the other way. If I'm going downhill, I'll end up going faster. It's easier to bike us down a steep hill versus a not so steep hill. Why? Because this slope force is smaller here than here. The magnitude of the slope force is influenced by steepness of the ramp. And if we're dealing with uphill, this becomes a bigger issue. Okay, so steepness of ramp is one thing that's going to influence steepness. What's the other thing that's going to influence this magnitude of the slope force? Well, this component right here, FG, how long this component is. FG is equal to mass of the system times the acceleration due to the force of gravity, which we could put G in here. This is a constant. Mass of the bike rider system. Mass of the bike rider system. Now, let's look at this. If we have, I'll try to do it on the same page here. I'll do two slopes. I'll make it pretty obvious. I'm trying to do the same slope, okay? Same object. No, sorry, not the same object. Small object, object with little mass, object with big mass. I draw out the force vector here, Fg, for object 1. I'll draw out the force vector here, and I'm going to exaggerate so we can see it. Oh, I did a bad job. Fg2. I'm going to run out of space, but that's all right. Let's draw out our rectangle. F slope right there. F perpendicular, we're not dealing with that. That's our F slope for object 1. Let's do that here. Draw my dotted line. Dotted line, draw the rectangle. Oh, okay, I did make it. All right, I thought it was going to be off the page. This is the perpendicular component, which I'm really not concerned with right now. Here's F slope for the second more massive object. This one right here. Same steepness of ramp between these two situations, smaller mass, bigger mass. Force component, the slope force component is greater here than here. Not because of ramp, but because of the weight of the object, the force of gravity acting on the object. So as a cyclist, what do we want to do? We want to try to have as little mass as possible. How do we do that? We buy frames that are really light or made of light material like carbon fiber, maybe aluminum, but aluminum's heavier than carbon fiber. We try to use as little mass on the bike as possible. So the other factor that's going to influence slope force is mass of the bike rider, and really the weight of the bike rider. And I put bike rider here because the biker can lose some weight too and decrease the slope force. So as a cyclist, maybe I need to lose 5 pounds. And that's why if you watch Tour de France or watch any bike race, the most successful climbers are the lightest cyclists, because they have less, in part because they have less mass, less weight, and their slope force resisting going uphill is less than a bigger, massive rider. Now, if we're looking at going downhill, totally different situation. Now, if we're looking at competing who can go down the hill as fast, that would be a slightly different type of cyclist. But that's why I'm more focused right now, at least at this stage of doing a cycling kinetic analysis on biking uphill. Try to make the bike rider as light as possible to go up that hill. That's wheels, the frame, the seat, the pedals, the hardware that allows the gears to shift, the gears themselves, the handlebars. These things all add up to, in the bike system, bike rider system mass. Okay, so that's slope force. Thank you.